Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. Ukraine's president says 2023 will be the year of victory. As the world marks 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion, Canada has announced new measures to support Ukraine, including nearly 200 additional sanctions and a promise to send 4 more Leopard tanks. I spoke with Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly about Canada's response on Friday. Minister Joly, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I want to talk about the new sanctions announced today from many different parts of the world. Obviously, this has been part of the West's response to put pressure on Russia to isolate them and their economy. But there is some evidence that while there's been an impact, sanctions have not been as effective as perhaps people would have liked because countries like Turkey and China have filled in some of these gaps. How difficult is it then to continue to put sanctions in place, knowing that there are some countries sort of going around them?
Well, Rosie, we announced today a very important package of sanctions, 200 people and entities that are targeted. We're doing that in lockstep with our European and American allies, and we've shown very important unity. At the same time, let's be frank, we've been following what other countries are doing, and any countries that are trying to circumvent sanctions, of course, we will be clear in our position in dealing with these countries. We've sent a clear message to China. We've sent also a clear message to the world, and we know that we need to do more. Why? Because sanctions work. The economy in Russia has been affected. Definitely their capacity, particularly on the military side, to be able to have access to many of the components that are important to the military sector also has been an issue. So all that to say, we will continue going forward and imposing sanctions, and we will show a lot of resolve in doing so.
On military support, we've seen Canada and other allied countries, I think, really change and evolve their position on what kind of support would be provided to Ukraine. We, for instance, have gone from providing non-lethal aid to lethal aid to now providing more tanks. The line that we've been willing to move, I guess, with Ukraine has changed pretty dramatically over the last year. What has changed our mind on that front, and why have we done that?
Well, we've been clear in terms of supporting Ukraine. There's no option but victory for Ukraine. We're all in, Rosie. That's what Canadians want us to do, but that's the right thing to do. Why? Because this is the biggest security threat since the Second World War. We need to make sure that the UN Charter is respected, that borders are respected, that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries in the world are respected, and therefore that Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is supported. So that's why we are sending heavy weapons. That's why we're sending them fast. That's why we need to make sure that we arm Ukraine. Because it's the only way to go in the circumstances. And Rosie, I'm a progressive politician. I never thought that one day I would be saying that we need to arm more country to get to peace, but that's exactly the case in these circumstances.
Well, let me ask you more about that. How far are we going to go in order to get to peace? You know, President Zelensky today was talking about bringing in more continents and more countries into a conversation around peace. China has put forward what it says is a peace plan to try and get people talking about peace between Ukraine and Russia. So I guess, is the only way to get to peace through more weaponry and more conflict?
Because clearly Russia right now is the aggressor, Ukraine is the victim. Ukraine is only defending itself from the aggressor. It's really Russia invading Ukraine and not vice versa. So that is why arming Ukraine is important, because everything that is going on the battlefield will have an impact afterwards at the negotiation table. And so more we're able to help Ukraine defend itself, more we will be able to put Ukraine in a strong position when it comes to negotiate peace.
What is the Canadian position on fighter jets? Obviously, I don't think we have any that we would be able to send over, but does the Canadian government believe that fighter jets are the next step forward in this conflict?
Well, at this point, when I was in Kyiv last week, President Zelensky didn't raise this issue with me, but we need to make sure that we work with our allies. We were the first country to send our tanks to Poland. As we speak, Ukrainian soldiers are being trained on these Leopard tanks. We are announcing also new tanks, and we need to make sure that it's not only arming Ukraine, but that weapons are sent in a very effective and very fast, because we need to make sure that time is of the essence and speed is necessary.
In terms of what happens next, there is more talk about a peace project. China, for instance, I don't know how you feel about China suddenly inserting itself into this conversation. President Zelensky says it's good, for instance, for China to say anything about Ukraine, but the actions still need to come. Where do you think we are in terms of the world's view of that idea?
Well, we're all in favor of talking about peace, but
Sure.
If China really wants peace, it needs to say to Russia to get out of Ukraine, period. Because, as I mentioned, there's clearly an aggressor and a victim, and China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It has a role to play to uphold the UN Charter, and so in that context, China should say to Russia to get out of Ukraine.
You were newly in your job as Foreign Affairs Minister when this started. I wonder what you remember from those first few days of how the world was responding to something that perhaps many of us didn't really expect.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was in Kyiv last January. That was a month and a half before the invasion. I had met at the time President Zelensky, who was asking for financial support from Canada. And now I was in Kyiv last week, and I met with him again, and I saw the difference in his posture, in how the entire government is showing strong resolve, in the determination, the courage that Ukrainians from all walks of life are showing. And, you know, we can just be inspired by how they've been able to fight back and to fight for their freedom, but also for ours. I said at the time that this would be the biggest security threat since the Second World War. Rosie, this is still the case. And that's why we need to continue to support them. That's why we need to have a strong voice and to rally as many countries to the cause of Ukraine, because Canada is a country that has benefited from the architecture, the norms that we've developed since the Second World War, because we're not a nuclear power, and we believe that international norms should be applying to big countries as small countries. And that's what exactly Ukraine is fighting for, that dream of freedom, that dream of a democratic country, and we will continue to support them.
I want to ask you one last question on a different topic, and that is these suggestions or allegations that China has somehow influenced or interfered in the past two elections. I realize you're going to be called as a witness in front of one of the parliamentary committees. At this point, though, given that politicians are involved in this conversation, I wonder whether you think a public inquiry or some sort of public forum where there are more neutral people involved in the conversation would be necessary to reassure people that they can have trust in the legitimacy of our elections.
Well, it is indeed important to reassure people that that basically Canadians decide the results of the elections. But foreign interference allegations are extremely serious, and we will never accept any form of foreign interference. And you were referring to institutions that can deal with this. Well, indeed, we have very strong institutions, and we need to make sure that they do their work. And you can count on my support, and you can count also on the government support for sure.
Okay. Minister Joly, nice of you to make the time. Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.